Welcome to the second episode of Rivers Radio. I'm here with John Hickey to talk about wood in rivers. And we're here on, unfortunately, a rather rainy day in May, so we're indoors, but we're here comfortably in the Arundel Arms. So now we're going to talk to John. So John, you were one of the first people to be employed by the Trust. If you could cast your memory that far back, would you be able to tell me how that happened?
That is casting it back a little way, Bruce. It was, I wouldn't say I was one of the first to technically be employed, but I was certainly there doing some volunteer work right at the very early days of the Trust. I did a geography degree at Sussex University and got my Bachelor of Science from the Biology Department at Sussex Uni. And I had a little bit of time on my hands that summer, and fortunately I'd heard about the Westcountry Rivers Trust, and I basically called them up and to see if they had any chance of any work. And they said, well, we at that present stage they'd just started what was the pioneering Tamar 2000 project. So that was the summer of 1996, and I was very fortunate to be able to be invited to come and join them for the summer. Actually, there was another student, Lucy Smith, who's the sister of David Smith, who runs the Myers project up on Exmoor, and we both spent the summer working for Arlen's Merry Band, which at the time really was Arlen as the main employee, with Simon Evans as the scientific officer being appointed. So it was quite a small team at that stage, and that was just being built upon at that stage really, and just developing the very start of the project. So that was quite an exciting time to be there, with all the input that came into that project. It was really quite a groundbreaking project, with catchment management really coming to the fore. It was a whole catchment approach, and that was really guided to some extent by Gordon Bealby and Clem Davies, who were sort of former head of the NRA in the Southwest region. And also the other groundbreaking side of it was brought by Professor Ed Maltby from Royal Holloway College, and he really helped develop the approach, which was not just catchment but ecosystem approach, of working with the landowners, the riparian owners in the catchment who actually own the resource, working with them to find a sustainable way of managing that resource. So it was at that time, the thinking of the project was really quite far-reaching, and it was quite, for me, very timely, and so that was great Sommers experience. And then I went off and did a Masters in Aquatic Resource Management at King's College London, which took me that year to complete that Masters. And I was very fortunate that the project had evolved in that year, and very fortunately there was a job opportunity for me to go and join effectively with Simon as to become one of the other on-the-ground scientific officers. So actually helping deliver the work on the ground at that time, which was very much a lot of the riparian habitat fisheries work, but that evolved into the whole farm approach, working with the farmers, doing all of the other land management, diffuse pollution side. So it was quite a baptism of fire, to be said, but very exciting. Yeah, I mean, I think the key to it was excellent training really back then, with the experience of certainly from Clem and Gordon Bealby and Ed Maltby, there was and working very closely with the Wetland Ecosystem Research Group, who at the time were based up at Eiger, up at North Week. Yeah. So that was all part of the process of identifying the important wetlands within the Tamar and looking at ways of buffering and protecting the river habitat.
Okay, so we're talking about wood in rivers today, and that brings us on to that phrase that fish live in trees. So that's often the thing a phrase you can use to make people stop and think. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully not literally. In the canopy of trees, there have been occasions in recent years when I think that may have been true. I think casting back to the floods on River Exe in December 2012, very significant, at least 1 in 50 year flood, probably on the bar almost 1 in 100 year flood. Yeah. the river burst its banks, and with it took the contents of several fish farms, which for a while were living in the fields of the valley of the River Exe.
Yeah.
I think several were found in the car parks at Morrison's.
But that's not what we mean.
But not
when we say
physically
fish live in trees.
in the trees. Now, the real thing about it, and for me, when you say trees, I think the primary habitat that we're looking at here is tree roots.
Yeah.
And those tree roots provide fantastic cover for fish.
Yeah.
They bind the riverbanks, they're holding the structure of the tree in place, but at the same time, the river's erosive force is eroding underneath and undercutting in under the trees. They're very firmly rooted in the bank, but in those undercuts and within the roots, that is the most important protective cover on many of our rivers for fish.
Okay, so when somebody puts some branches or coppice waste and so on into the river,
Yeah.
would you say that essentially they are substituting that habitat for roots? So essentially, it's performing the same ecological function as roots.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at within the actual physical habitat of the river, you know, what do fish really need? Well, it's pretty simple. They only really need two things. One is good water quality, and two is good physical habitat. If you've got good water quality, you've got a good food supply. And if you've got that good physical habitat, you've got space for the fish. And that's both for a place for them to feed, but that important cover. If ever they're disturbed by humans, a predator, whether it's kingfisher, heron, an otter, they will go and hide. But yes, as you say, if you put in other pieces of woody debris within the river, that's immediately creating cover.
Yeah.
The question is, how can you keep it in the place that you may want it to be in? And that's probably the more difficult bit. If you're talking most rivers, obviously, down here in the Westcountry, off the upland areas, you've got, fairly large boulders, and those don't move quite so far, in space. A lot of them don't move unless it's a very significant spate. Again, the tree roots are pretty solid.
Yeah.
But some of the smaller, if you say branches, etc., are very mobile unless they get hooked up in other structures within the river. So yes, if you're putting in stuff, it will provide cover. It may only be temporary if it's washed away in space, but if it can be fixed, then it may provide cover actually even within those spates.
Okay, so that gives a good summary as to why it's important for fish, as essentially it is some kind of refuge. Also, in resting place. I mean, it wasn't all, and that's probably quite well accepted now. It wasn't always the case, and really there seemed to be a time, if you go back when the main talk about wood was removal.
Yeah.
And it's certainly my perception that I'm sure there are people in this country that have always thought wood in rivers is really important, but certainly it's my perception that this move was influenced by America and the river restoration movement. And how do you think that ties in?
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to put it into sort of into context. Yes, in this country, I think wood has certainly been perceived as a problem, but that's been a more recent thing. Probably let's just say since the Second World War.
Yeah.
It's really become as the population's increased in this country and the pressure on our land's increased, then you come into conflict. Now, it's a long way to go back to a truly wild landscape. Thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, to get back to the wild wood that would have covered this country. And at that stage, there would have been an awful lot of wood in rivers, from very large fallen trees down to small branches, leaves, etc. I think the conflict and the problem with wood in rivers is really over one factor, and that's flooding. And if any wood causes flooding, really it's when it builds up against man-made structures that it's its biggest problem.
Yeah.
So if it pins up against a bridge or against culverts, it will cause the water to back up around and flood. Now, for a farmer may see that as a problem just as a localised flooding of a field, but of course the worst is if it's in housing people's property. So I think there has been intensive management on our rivers, probably along with the intensification of everything else in this country, along with agriculture since the Second World War. And there were very large programmes to clear woody debris from rivers to stop that flooding problem, and indeed clear fell a lot of the river trees to stop that future problem. The reverse has obviously been the case probably in America. They've probably been a bit ahead of us on that scale, and then they've started to view it, well actually some of this wood is very beneficial. It is providing habitats, it is providing shelter for various things, not just for fish. Out there, they're probably fortunate. I think the reason they probably were a bit ahead of us is probably because they had beavers.
Yeah.
And so they were getting natural debris dams within streams, but they were also getting them created by the natural animals within their habitat. Of course, we lost beavers probably 200-300 years ago in this country, so we haven't had that influence to draw upon. But yes, no, they've certainly gone back to recreating those natural habitats. And yes, in the States, you know, they've used wood in river restoration projects, from whole trees, you know, to smaller sections. But certainly, you know, now it would be whole trees, but importantly with the tree root attached. And they may actually fly that in by helicopter, bring it in on large arctics, and get that into the river. So it's very stable woody debris that they're, you know, putting in, but certainly on the larger side. And yeah, no, and I think we have learned that and some of those techniques. Certainly, I think the pioneers, were the Americans, and probably in Wisconsin particularly, they did an awful lot of work. Ray Hunt, let's say through the 80s, it came to my attention in the writing of his book, Trout Stream Therapy, which he wrote in 1993, really showing all the techniques of using wood in rivers to protect them. And the two key things there were protecting the marginal habitat with large trees, with wood, revetments, but also then buffering the river with fencing.
Yeah.
Over there, I think they had quite intensive agriculture with cattle, and so they were looking to buffer that. The farmland was quite important to the farmers, so there was that conflict there between the fisheries and farming, and they were just trying to find a way to buffer it. And the farmers, of course, were very worried about erosion of their land, so actually it worked quite well in stopping the erosion with large woody debris, and then fencing off the cattle and giving them formalised drinking places, gave that overall sort of management they were looking for. And certainly they showed very large improvements in the numbers of fish within the streams. I'd say 50% of their studies were showing increases of 25 to 50% in fish numbers in the streams, which was quite impressive. And so those lessons, yes, have come over to this country and probably picked up upon by the likes of David Sommers and Dr. McGiles at the Game Wildlife Conservation Trust. They wrote their book on lowland management of streams, like the ones where they were based out around Hampshire, Dorset, like the Piddle, and they really drew upon that work for woody debris and creating structures within river, and showed the importance of fencing. And they actually came down. David came down to the trust to give actually at the start of the Tamar project, to come and share his knowledge of what he'd learned. I think he followed that up with a lecture in 1997 on salmonid habitat management, which was held here at the Arundel Arms. So you know, they were quite influential probably in translating some of this stuff from America. And of course at the same time, Martin O'Grady over in Ireland at the Central Fisheries Board was doing very similar work.
Channels and challenges.
Exactly, which is culminated in that in his book in 2006. So there's been a translation of that work, but I must admit, you know, certainly in Ireland they've undertaken it in nearly exactly the same manner. Whereas I'd say here in the Westcountry we've been much more constrained, and our work certainly at that time was very much buffering the river with the fencing to keep the from the effects of intensive cattle poaching and grazing. But we didn't do any of the very intensive work on woody debris in the rivers. We certainly did some of the coppicing, some of the selective coppicing that Martin O'Grady had shown the benefits of, showing the benefits of reducing the overshading from abandoned coppice. And that really, the essence of that was really showing the traditional management of the rivers. The rivers have always been managed, but that management has changed. They would have been prior, and certainly up to the Second World War, the rivers were heavily managed like the hedges were right across our landscape. The hedges were all cut and laid, and the wood used as a wood source, and the rivers were too. Certainly if you look at some of the historic pictures of some of our rivers, they actually were far less wooded than they are now.
That's very true. When you look at those old black and white pictures, you can see for miles, and now it's just goes straight into the trees.
Absolutely. So, but you know, that's changed. So we were asking the questions: is how do we manage the rivers now? At the time, there wasn't actually probably such a demand for wood fuel. Everyone was still using oil, central heating, much easier And the key problem has always been, certainly in recent years, there's been a lack of labour on farms to undertake those works, which is why cutting and laying of hedges has stopped and management along the rivers has stopped. But yeah, it's getting that transition. So the question is how to manage that and how to maintain a more natural, probably diversity of habitats along the river, to get different age structures within the trees, to try and get a bit of transition of management rather than either no trees or completely covered of trees. So it's trying to get that balance.
It's that mosaic.
That dappled light, but I think that age structure of the trees is very important. So that's something that we sort of certainly looked at to work on. So that's where we were. Let's say 1996 to 2000 was very much doing some selective coppicing and fencing to buffer the river behind it, and that's really where we were. And there were quite strong limitations on what we could do with woody debris, and even at that time, around that time, the thoughts about woody debris were probably changing. Even amongst ourselves, really, on how to manage it. Certainly, there were, very large. In some places, there were very large, dams of wood, very similar to a beaver dam, and the worry, certainly amongst those with strong fisheries interest, that some of those could become impassable.
I think if that is true, that's not untrue.
Which certainly is true, and particularly if those stems, etc., were on a structure. So if they were on a culvert, if they were on bridges on weirs, then they were causing problems. So in those instances, a lot of those did need removing. So it's just working along to try and get that balance was probably where we were at that time within the project.
Okay, so you touched on it quite interestingly earlier when you were we're talking about the differences between different countries and how they approach woody debris in rivers. One of the big features of England and the UK in general really is the high population densities. So this potential conflict between people, their infrastructure and their homes, and the natural environment and rivers, which have potential to cause damage and flooding to all the things that we hold dear. So really, that brings on the question of when is wood a threat, when is wood a benefit. And so you quite far way back you got a decision tree which sort of clarified when should you hoik it out, when should you think about putting it in, and when do you just leave things alone. So if you could
that was it. It was that was trying to have that discussion with landowners, and it was trying to formalise that at the time. So yes, I've actually got a copy of not the exact one, but one with the pictures of it, and I can place those pictures exactly.
So when was this then? When were you?
So this
putting
was
this together for the first time.
This particular one was really, I was trying to illustrate it a bit more. This particular one has got the pictures from. I work on the tail on a tributary of the River Otter.
Yeah.
So that would have been in 2001, and these particular ones are right in the middle of the tail at Tuck Mill, where there was an awful lot of woody debris from large, abandoned, typical alder stems, which had started to collapse into the river. And that's been one of the key things again with the coppicing, that if you leave some of these previously coppiced trees and you leave them too long, eventually they will become unstable and fall into the river. And it's at that point that they potentially start to cause a problem. And in this instance, yes, they were quite close to the bridge and were flooding the properties there. So some of them did need management. So yeah, going through the decision tree, first point at the top is, due to the high ecological importance of woody debris, wherever possible, try to retain it in the river.
So
however,
take out what's already there.
Exactly. However, if the debris blockage could lead to flooding of the property, then that's either in its current location or washing downstream and blocking culverts, then it should be removed. And on that, really, at that time, we were looking at, is the fallen tree or limb fixed to the riverbank or embedded in the gravels? So is it anchored?
Yeah.
If it's anchored, yes, that you move on to the next stage. No, if it's not anchored, then in probability at that point, it may need extracting, particularly if it's causing that flood risk. The next point would be, is the woody debris causing excessive erosion by directing the current into a vulnerable bank? And this is one of the things that the farmers were very always very worried about to see their productive farmland washing away. And so, there had to be a bit of a balance there, and that's probably the contentious bit that I think they were struggling with in America, is how to protect the farmland and provide the woody debris. Hence their more larger scale approach to actually using it as a protective device. So yes, if it's causing a problem, then again it may have to be extracted. And then the third point was really on the fish migration. Taking high flows into account, does the debris cause such a dense barrier that it may impede fish migration? And again, you're really looking at the height of the barriers. Fish can easily jump, let's say, I think you take the National Fish Pass panel, I think they can jump about 40 centimetres.
Yeah.
So, if the debris dam is greater than that, then it might need some attention. And in a lot of cases, really, we're just looking to tweak it. Can we move some of the bits of wood to allow some migration through it without removing it all? And that point again at the bottom, just keep stressing that due to its high ecological importance, retain it in the river. And for fishermen, try and retain it. And if you, for your access for fishing, could you trim parts of it to keep it there?
Because that's a key, that's a question. It's a compromise really in that
It's
case,
so,
because people want to be able to cast a line and be able to catch fish,
so
but at the same time
the
fish want somewhere to go and hide.
Exactly, there's a whole host of issues, and within that, I had a couple of good illustrative photos just showing that good bank-side cover that you could get with the trees. So that was, as I say, that was 2001, and
but these days there's national guidelines as to when these things should be done.
Exactly, and I've got that here. I've got the EA woody debris, National Woody Debris in Rivers Policy, which I like to think we actually had a little bit of input into shaping actually. So this was from 2012, this particular document, and that again, it's trying to get a balance. It was also partly for their internal flood defence teams, who again had historically been removing all of this woody debris. I'd sort of followed on this work, probably on the River Ex then, with the River Ex project. And again, we were looking to do more work. We'd done the fencing work, we'd done some of the coppicing work, but we were wanting to improve the in-stream habitat. And this was one of the points where actually we'd never been able to move past with the agency on discussions, was how to use some of this wood to create in-stream habitat. At the time, we couldn't get flood defence consent to put it into the river because there just wasn't agreement that it was still causing a problem. So I think I took the Environment Agency's FRB team, so the Fisheries, Recreation, Biodiversity team. They came and did a site visit on the River Ex, and they came to look at a single piece of woody debris that I put into the river. And that is here within the document actually. They got a picture of it on about page 6. That shows this multi-stemmed alder that we'd coppiced, and we'd taken some of the stems off that and we'd laid them into the river. Some of them were pinned and some of them were wired in. And that was the first trial at that one little site, and a year later the team came out to have a look at that. Could really see the benefits of it, and really I think it helped to push this document forward and the discussion, and it allowed us actually to then take forward that technique, that we're happy with the technique, and we rolled that out across the top of the River Ex, and wherever then we were coppicing, we were looking then to introduce woody debris with the techniques of wiring it in to the actual trees, stools that were there, or if there wasn't something suitable, then pinning it in with metal pins. So that technique, had evolved over that period.
Okay, so those, everything you're talking about there are fairly, basically reasonably wild rivers that you're trying to just get that much better restoration for. Some of our rivers are very heavily canalised or channelized, and you need to use wood in a slightly different manner there, and I'm thinking of things like flow deflectors where you've almost given up on trying to renaturalise it, so all you're trying to do is create some artificial habitat that has a natural function. So I'm sort of so can you talk a little bit about how you put in a flow deflector, and what's the point of having a flow deflector pinned into the river? It doesn't look very natural.
No, absolutely. That comes back to the point of what's river restoration and what are we aiming to do with it, and we're trying to restore the form and function of the rivers geomorphologically, and that, on a catchment scale is the aim. But unfortunately, as you say, there was very large land drainage dredging undertaken, again with the intensification, and primarily for the intensification of agriculture, to drain the wetlands, to lower the water table, to stop the flooding of the land, so that the land could be managed more intensively. And that's left us with a challenge that really effectively our rivers are over widened and over deep, and it's very difficult for them, and in some cases, particularly the lowland ones, have had a lot of trees removed as well, along this intensive pasture areas. So how do you restore those sections? You don't have you don't necessarily have the natural pool riffle sequences that you would normally get, because the river's also been straightened and aligned. So what you're really looking at here with flow defectors is trying to put back some of those twists and turns within an artificial channel. So that's really, you're into a more sort of heavily modified water bodies, and again we're looking at that on a part of the River Exe at the moment, where it probably is more appropriate to undertake some let's say you could say a little bit more aggressive techniques of actually going into the stream itself. As I say, we've really worked on buffering the river and working on the riparian corridor. Now you're actually moving within the channel to undertake works. And again, this is where you have to get the agreement with the flood on the flood defence side to make sure you're not causing any problems. But ultimately, a small twig in a stream of this size, in a flow conditions, is not going to make any difference, in my opinion, on flooding. But of course, all that has to be modelled and taken into account, and it does, of course, have to go through that formal process with the Environment Agency through the Flood Defence Department. But really, all you're looking to do is to put that woody debris into the river. If you put it in aligned with the bank, it's certainly not going to cause any problems with erosion, but we want to make some things a bit more interesting. So you're going to bring it out on an angle to the flow, so bring it around to sort of 20 to 40 degrees to start deflecting the flow. And ideally, you could do these in a slight series, and you're starting to actually move the flow and get some meandering back in the channel, so that you're actually getting some natural deep areas next to the riverbanks again that are going to be good habitat for your fish within the river. So that's the overall aim of those deflectors. And again, they can be made from a variety of things. So whether that's a simple tree stem pinned in, trees cut in half log boards, or indeed whole trees with tree roots attached. Probably to look more natural and wild, than the further you go to a natural tree with tree roots would be the best way. But if you've ever tried moving a tree stem, you'll find that that's pretty heavy. But once you add on the actual root ball, it's incredibly heavy. And if you've got a large tree with a large root ball, you're talking several tons, so they're very difficult to manoeuvre. Hence why a lot of the river restoration work that's been done in the past has been using lengths of tree, and then they may be pinned into place, because it's just a lot more physically easy to undertake.
I think a lot of that's to do with the kind of rivers that we work on. I mean, mostly we work on, there are a few chalk streams we work on, but mostly we're working on spate rivers. If we could be much more relaxed about moving lightweight material if we didn't have the spate flows that we get in the winter time in the Westcountry. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, we haven't done any of that actually, but I mean that was certainly one of the things that they have done a lot more in the States and in Ireland, is using other materials, so large boulders, big fish-friendly rocks. I mean, if you look up onto Dartmoor, you'll see them very clearly. There's a very important role that the boulders have played. I'll just put a few in Cornwall.
So
in some of these really heavily modified
so
areas.
Exactly. So it's just trying to add some diversity back into the channel. I mean, it's just they're both providing the same sort of role of diverting the current and providing some interest. Just providing extra bits of scour. A trout really doesn't need that much depth. If you get a sort of 20 to 30 centimetres depth of scour, then that's going to be able to hold a surprisingly large fish. Maybe a fish of sort of 12 inches could live in that quite happily. If you get a deeper pot again, then you're going to get a larger number of fish. So what you can provide with these is quite significant habitat, and it should be fairly straightforward, and it should be fairly safe in those environments, particularly as they already have been overwhelmed and overopened. you're not really adding to the flood. You're not reducing the flood capacity in particularly in large flood events, which is what really worries most people. You know, it's one in 10, 1 in 20, 1 in 50-year events.
Yeah.
You know, it's not removing that capacity. Yes, as soon as you get near houses, etc., then you're going to need to be careful. But particularly in our rural landscape, then I think there could be some reasonable space to play with, let's say.
So, one thing that's happening at the moment is there's a growing recognition of the potential of wood fuel to be carbon neutral in heating people's homes and biomass fueling and so on. Potentially, there's a conflict between, so you do some coppicing.
Yeah.
Do you put it in your wood burner?
Yeah.
Or do you put it in the river? You know, what are your thoughts on that question?
Well, I'd like to see a bit more going back in the river. You know, ideally, you know, a nice tree falling down going into the river. Ideally, I'd like to see those left, but in many instances, probably depends on the species of tree. To say the truth, Bruce. If it's an ash or a beech, then the landowner may be a lot more keen to get his hands on it for the firewood.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas, let's say, if it's an older or even particularly a willow, then he might be a lot more relaxed. You know, the wood fuel value may not be quite so great. But even within that, even you know, if you're taking a whole section and works are being done, and I think a little negotiation for some to be left is usually quite acceptable. But
share alike.
I think so. Yeah, rather than just taking the whole lot, you know, which is certainly, you know, would have been done traditionally. But it's trying to be a bit more selective about it and leave. You know, ideally, we want, as I say, we want the canopies within our rivers to be evolving. We want some younger trees coming through to be replacing some of the older trees in a future date as they fall in. So that's why you want that different age structure. So we're going to be selectively removing some. We're never going to be removing any mature trees. They're always going to stay. It's really this multi-stem trees that we're really looking to manage, that have been managed in the past. And what I'm looking at now on the River Exe where I'm working is these have been coppiced, some of them completely, but we're going back after, let's say, 10 years, which would have been your traditional management time. Really, it's a lot easier to manage, to move and handle the wood when it's a smaller size.
Yeah.
Once it gets that over, you know, that sort of size, it gets too heavy to move by hand. It's too difficult a job. But what we're looking to do is, there hasn't actually been that demand for the wood, and in most cases, we're looking to try and improve the habitat. So actually, we're slightly probably reducing the amount of wood that some of these streams can produce by actually using a different technique of cutting and laying in to the river bank some of the stems as they're growing back. And our aim on a multi-stem tree would be to cut and lay in, let's say, 80% of those stems over that 10 years growth, and leave 2 or 3 really good stems to grow on to become quite large, mature bits of timber. And you might then allow maybe just one of those to grow on to become a much larger, mature stem, and then perhaps even lay in or coppice some of those to be used for pinning into the river.
So not only is that providing short-term ecological benefit, but you're managing the riverbank in a way which is less requiring labour in the first place, so it's more likely to be maintained.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as I said, we identified right at the start the importance of the tree roots, and actually, because the trees have always been coppiced, they actually benefit from being coppiced because it keeps them strong. As I said earlier, if they're left to go, they get top heavy, they're blown by the wind, and in they go, and you lose the whole tree with the important tree roots, and that tree is lost from the system in the longer term. So coppicing them back gets a much stronger tree root growth.
So that, I mean, and then you've got a bank erosion and so on,
and that's helping exactly. That's helping to
for various reasons.
That's helping to stabilise the banks. And coppicing again allows the light onto the river banks to let some of the marginal vegetation grow back, because some of the banks can get very bare underneath the abandoned coppice. And again, letting some of the light onto the river channel, particularly the riffles, where you know you've got your invertebrates grazing on the algae on the stones. So it's trying to improve that whole section of the ecosystem in one go.
Okay, so I think that's a fantastic overview, and I think we're coming to an end now. Are we coming to just a general consensus about the importance of wood in rivers, and we come to a fairly sort of stable, it's just becoming one of the usual tools that are used in river management, or do you think there are new approaches and challenges that we can look at to manage wood or in and around rivers?
I think it's definitely becoming much more accepted of the importance of wood. I think there's the other factor that probably regulatory agencies that used to remove it in the past actually don't have the budgets anymore, so perhaps leaving it, and are quite happy to leave it now because they recognise the importance of it. But there still will be conflict, and I think that's where probably we need to look at better spatial planning and mapping within the catchments. We've just been discussing this actually this week on the River Barle on Exmoor, and that's really followed on from the 2012 flood there, which was a 100-year flood, which brought down an awful lot of trees, large woody debris, blocked the main bridge in Dolverton and flooded the town. That's forgotten, it already also knocked down the very historic Clapper Bridge of Tar Steps. So quite a lot of damage was caused, and so there was understandably the need to look at that and ask questions as to what happened and could this problem be resolved. And two or three things did come out of a very interesting workshop on flooding that was held in the town. For me, one of the things was one of the limitations on flow and the conveyance of wood down it was the bridge in the town. Now that bridge has not always been there. To put it into historic terms, probably the town's been there for 2,000 years, and certainly settlement, and the river always had a ford. So the bridge is much more recent. Let's say it's 250 years old, but that is a severe limitation on the conveyance of floods and woody debris, because the trees can get pinned on that bridge. So as long as that bridge is there, I was of the opinion that you're always going to have an increased flood risk. So there was a worry from the town is that what is being done to manage the wood in the catchment. But of course there's a massive balance here, so it's a triple SI in the River Barle. And the wood is obviously providing very important habitats for the fish, for invertebrates, etc., for otters, etc. So it's trying to get that balance. So we're just meeting with the Environment Agency, with Natural England, with the National Park, to really look at the issue of how it could be managed, how it could be looked at in zones of areas which would be too high a risk probably to retain woody debris, even stuff that maybe in some more areas you may be more relaxed, but it may be just too difficult in that kilometre above the Tar Steps Bridge, and a kilometre or so above the town, and you may therefore have to go down that extraction route. But it's getting that balance. So there is a lot of it's understanding the pressures from both sides still. I mean, ideally you just leave the lot, take the approach that like the beavers take, like they've been taking in parts of America, much more aggressive, chop and drop, leave all the wood in there. But as I say, it's that it's smaller island here. We've got to get that balance. So I think there is scope for different techniques to manage it, and one of the interesting factors there was the discussion on the river. Traditionally, it was managed by the farmers. The landowners had all got on with it and done it themselves. There was that perception that for a while the regulatory bodies took over some of that management. They did some of the management of the trees, and now it's really sort of gone back full circle to the landowners. And I don't necessarily think that it's really been fully communicated to the landowners that it's up to them to manage it. So we're now having to be much clearer, I think, on the advice that is being given from all of those agencies, so that everybody understands what they need to do. And and on the techniques, how can they assess the debris? Can they call in, let's say, the National Park or ourselves to have a look at the any debris and decide whether it is a risk or not? But certainly, a sort of framework is something that's going to be developed there. Really working on from that sort of decision tree that we had. But whether we can use some of those, let's say, different techniques on a triple SI with its, let's say, more natural form, then that's when we're sort of running into conflict. It'd be nice to use some of the techniques of wiring and pinning, but it just may not be appropriate. So I think those techniques are there, but they may not be applied everywhere. We might need some even cleverer techniques, and I'm not quite sure at this stage what they're going to be. But I think possibly on the repositioning, it's very difficult to re-anchor a tree into the riverbank or re-anchor it into the bed to make sure it's stable. So those are the sort of challenges that you face on a variety of rivers across the Westcountry.
Okay, well thanks John, that's a fantastic overview of some of the past and the origins of certainly where we come from woody debris, and also some thoughts through to the future and really how, as with most of these things, how you start off looking at one element in a river, which is the woody river, and then you start rippling out thinking about planning and housing and all the other demands that we put on our rivers.
Well, that's it. No, it is quite a complicated, complex picture, and you have to be very holistic in looking at it, at all the effects, because certainly, what maybe one person's wood fuel is another fish's a house. So we need to look at that quite carefully.
Well, thanks very much, John. That's that fantastic way to wrap up episode 2 of